All right, everybody. Welcome to another video review. I guess this time is a first. Instead of reviewing some of my collection and my stuff, I'm going to be reviewing and sharing my thoughts on a movie I saw with my daughter today. So we saw Wreck-It Ralph 2, and we saw it at AMC. So first of all, it was a really nice theater. It was Adobe Theater, and this, I think, is a reasonably new add-on to the AMC theaters, at least in our neck of the woods. But it was a really nice experience. I mean, we went in there, it was amazing sound, a great picture. The sound was fantastic. And normally when I see movies, I like to see them on IMAX 3D, just with the biggest screen, the best sound. And I have to say that the sound for this, this experience rivaled that of the IMAX theater I usually go to. Also, all the seats are pre-chosen and they're basically recliners. So that was really nice. So it was one of the more comfortable movie-going experiences I've ever been to. So there was that, so it was really nice. We had seen Wreck-It Ralph 1. My daughter saw it on streaming, and I actually went to see it in person. So it's been a while. And that would make sense because I think it was released 6 years ago. So my daughter would have been too young to really see it in the movie theater. So I did see it by myself. And I really liked the original Wreck-It Ralph 1. So I kind of had high hopes for this one, although I was a little bit uneasy because looking at the trailers, the whole thing with the internet, I was afraid it would just be kind of these random, just cameos, and I thought it might be a little bit messy. So I guess it's time to go into the sport, kind of the review territory, and I will be spoiling significant aspects of the movie. So a warning for those of you who haven't seen it yet. This is the second weekend. I didn't see it opening weekend. So the bottom line is I thought it was okay. I didn't love it. And I'm still ambivalent whether I even liked it or not. I really enjoyed the first one because I'm a video game fan, and I thought it was like a very clever take on video game characters in general, and I thought the first movie had a lot of heart. So for this one, I think there's a couple of problems with it, and I'll go into that in some detail. And obviously that's going to involve some spoilers. And I talked to my daughter about that, and she did agree with a lot of my criticisms. So first, the good, obviously it's a Disney film, which means that the production quality, the animation, it's just all top notch. Obviously the work is top notch. Everything's really clean, really smooth. It's gorgeously animated, and I think we don't give enough credit because we're so spoiled these days. But it is really amazing that the work that these artists do to try to give that, to basically deliver that product to us time and time again. So it's a gorgeous picture. Sound, beautiful. I thought that the voice acting was fantastic, that no complaints there. The main problem I had with this movie is centers around basically story decisions and characterizations. So basically the plot of the movie revolves around the fact that Princess Vanellope, the racer, her game's wheel gets broken, and when it gets broken, because it's such an old game, they can't replace the steering wheel, and if you don't replace the steering wheel, then the owner of the arcade where Wreck-It Ralph and Vanellope live, he was just going to basically get rid of the machine because it's just not worth it. And so the story centers around Ralph and Vanellope going into the World Wide Web, going onto the internet to try to get that wheel. And as it happens, because it's such an old game, the only place to find the wheel is on an eBay auction. So that's sort of the premise of the story. But when you get to the nitty-gritty, they decide to make this movie around essentially the relationship between Ralph and Vanellope, and it's kind of like an odd commentary on that relationship. It's like a commentary about being too needy or being a little bit domineering, And basically the setup is that, and it requires, and again, the audience to either really know the original movie really well, which again, this movie, the Wreck-It Ralph 1 was made 6 years ago, or to really pay super close attention to the actual early parts of the movie, which is that, Wreck-It Ralph used to be a villain, right? He was the villain in the video game Fix-It Felix. And so he was just basically always, universally hated. He's the bad guy. And imagine kind of like Bowser from Super Mario Brothers. I think he's supposed to be maybe the stand-in for the Donkey Kong or Bowser. And so he has no friends, he's misunderstood, he's lonely, and for basically most of his life, he's just always been sort of the outcast. And that's kind of what made the first movie, in a way, kind of endearing, because you're really rooting for him, you're empathetic for him, you want him to kind of succeed. So with that backdrop, the first movie ends with him finally, kind of saving Vanellope and developing this friendship with her. And so she's kind of like not only his best friend, she's like his only friend. And so you have to understand that context moving forward in this movie. So he's basically portrayed in this movie as like really clingy. He's always, afraid of her, like, I guess, leaving him. He's very sensitive. She'll make these offhand comments, and he's like, well, what do you mean by that? Does that mean that you don't like me? He's basically extraordinarily insecure, right, about his relationship with her, because I think he's just afraid of losing her because she's everything to him. And that's kind of like an interesting dynamic to base an entire film off of, but that's how Ralph is sort of portrayed in this sequel. And I don't know if the writers or the directors planned this. These are the same guys who made Zootopia, which is one of my favorite animated films ever. It's like an amazing animated film. But it just made Ralph feel awfully creepy. And even though this is a children's film and they're just supposed to be friends, there's like this weird overlay, like, where he's so domineering and so possessive. It got a little bit like uncomfortable just kind of watching it. You can, as an adult, you begin to kind of see parallels between this and maybe modern domestic abuse situations and that type of thing. And I don't know whether they were really going for that or not, but this is like the central conflict of the entire movie, because essentially as you follow them through their adventures, they do manage to get the wheel, and a lot of the shenanigans revolve around, number one, how they buy the wheel on eBay, and then how they have to basically raise money to pay for it. And it goes through sort of, ironically, the YouTube culture, where you have a lot of YouTube stars that are making a lot of money because of views and clicks and likes, and they play off of that. It's very clever. But essentially, as they go through all of that, Vanellope essentially realizes that she doesn't want to go back to her old life in the arcade, and she doesn't want to go back racing the same race, and she wants to stay in this new game called Slaughter Race, that basically is a better match for her personality, and it fulfills her more. So it's in a way kind of almost like her moving on with her life and kind of opening her horizons. And again, it plays off that dynamic between Vanellope ready to move on, and then of course Ralph being extremely clingy and needy and kind of possessive. And that's the story, and just kind of talks about the Ralph's growth as he has to realize that sometimes these friendships they last, but you have to adapt to them, and you have to think about what's best for your friend, and not just like friendship is not possession. In other words, it's something more than that. He has to kind of come to that realization. So this is the story of Wreck-It Ralph 2, which is kind of interesting and a little bit disappointing to me for a couple of reasons. The reason is that in the first movie, I think the reason Wreck-It Ralph was a success the first time is because the titular character is someone you really like, you feel a lot of empathy for, and they do a great job making you feel empathy for him. He's very likable, so thus you are invested in his journey, you're invested in kind of his goals, you want him to succeed, and you feel great for him when he actually does break out of his mold and he does succeed. So he's very likable. Vanellope is also very likable in the first movie. And for a movie like this, that's really important, that the main characters are characters that you root for and that you empathize with and that you love, and you want them to succeed. And they basically took these characters in the second movie and they made them, in my opinion, rather unlikable. It was hard for me to root for either of them. I've already gone into kind of their kind of a rather uncomfortable portrayal of Ralph. And I think they portrayed him in a very unsympathetic light. Maybe they didn't think they did, but they did. I mean, the last act of the movie, the bad guy, there's no bad guy in this movie. The bad guy is essentially a dark version of Wreck-It Ralph himself, where a virus that was unleashed essentially takes a copy of him and his insecurities, and it replicates viral copies of him. And so you're basically seeing this extremely uncomfortable, looking version, literally tens of thousands of hulking, possessive, creepy Ralphs obsessed with getting Vanellope. And eventually they all combine into this writhing mass that turns into a giant Wreck-It Ralph, where his hands and face are made up of tiny little, essentially zombie versions of Wreck-It Ralph. It's really creepy. And even Wreck-It Ralph himself in the movie, during the climax where he's trying to save Vanellope, essentially from a perverted version of himself, looks at it and, kind of seeing it, that gives him that clarity. And even he said, wow, this is really disturbing. That's him. So I've gotten into why I wasn't too fond of that characterization. But, Vanellope herself was not portrayed in a very positive light. I thought, at least for me personally, watching the movie, I thought she came off being a little bit self-centered, a little bit selfish. What set off Ralph, with the final conflict is he was really excited. He was essentially killing himself, embarrassing himself, making all these horrible YouTube videos to get views and likes, to generate essentially the income, generate the funds to buy this wheel. He finally does it at, I think, pretty great personal cost, because he loves her that much, and because she comes to her realization that she doesn't want to go back. She's supposed to meet him in front of eBay to get this wheel. She basically stands him up, and she goes off to the slaughter race to be with her new friend and talk about the race and talk about life. And then he tries to call her, and that's where he finds out that she, kind of listening in on her conversation, because he's trying to call her because she stood him up. That's how he finds out that she's not going back. And so she is not portrayed, in my opinion, as a particularly sympathetic person either. I mean, sure, she's portrayed as, in a way, as a victim of his neediness, but she also comes across, in my opinion, rather callous and uncaring, and a little bit selfish, and not very appreciative of everything that he's done for her. And okay, she gets caught out on it briefly at the very end, because she's saying, well, I can't believe he did this and did that, and then Yes, which is one of the characters. She's one of the algorithms on BuzzTube, which is this movie's version of YouTube, pointed out, he also sacrificed a lot making these horrible videos to raise the money to get you your steering wheel so your game can come back online. So the movie kind of acknowledges the fact that these two characters are really unlikable, but that doesn't solve the problem that they've taken two people I really, really liked the first movie and made them really unlikable in the second movie. And I have a kind of a big problem with that, because these are the people that you're going on this journey with. So there is that. And of course, getting back to the whole issue with the plot line, there's really no there's really no main antagonist in this movie. The story essentially is, the steering wheel is like the MacGuffin that they have to get, but really the story centers around, again, that relationship between Ralph and Vanellope and all those issues of possessiveness. It's just really weird. And I'm not necessarily against that. I think that's a really nice message, maybe to deliver to kids and sometimes adults, about relationships and friendships, and how, they have to change, and how you can't be too possessive. But usually, for a good story, you want to have an A storyline, and then you want to have a B storyline or a couple of B storylines. But the A storyline has to be sort of the main one. It has to be gripping. That's the one you want to follow. And the problem here, in my opinion, is that Wreck-It Ralph 2 doesn't have an A storyline. Their A storyline really should have been more of a B storyline. And I think the movie would have benefited a great deal from a more, classic antagonist. The stakes are a little bit higher. There's something that you can get invested in. And maybe while, Ralph and Vanellope are basically in the middle of that A storyline, trying to, defeat the antagonist, and then getting to know other characters that help them, a side, more subtle story could be the dynamics in the relationship and Ralph slowly realizing that, he may have to set Vanellope free or may have to be more mature in terms of how he's dealing with this relationship. I think that would have made it a little bit better, and they could have tried to portray that in a little bit more sympathetic light. I think that would have done wonders for the movie, but as it is, there's no A. There's no bad guy. There's no, all of it is like, the bad guy is Ralph and how he's acting. And again, this was really disappointing because I really loved him as a character in the first movie. He was so sympathetic. He turned him into this basically almost halfway stalker type boyfriend almost. It was just weird, So the movie ends, kind of with them understanding each other, and they have kind of a long distance relationship. They still visit each other. They're still good friends, but she's off in her new game, and he stayed behind. So it's fine, but for those reasons, I can't say that I really, like this movie very much, just because of that. A lot of the more minor characters from the first movie don't really come back, like Felix, and I think his wife. He met her in the first one. She's like the Halo ripoff, the blonde girl with the guns and all that. They have like a little cameo almost, a little joke. So there's very minor little cameos. The new characters were fun. I think Gal Gadot plays this new character. She does a really good job, and you can tell her accent very easily, so you can place it extremely easily. And of course, they draw her a little bit like her, so I think she does a great job. I think that is a really cool character. And I think yes, I don't know who plays her. Another pretty famous person I think plays her, but this all good. There's some nice, very sort of interesting little commentaries on the internet. So those are good. Now, the highlight of this movie, and what saves it for me, is the introduction of the Disney princesses. They're not in it for a lot. I would say maybe max about 10 minutes, but when they were in this movie, they really saved it. They, kind of imbued it with so much humor and character. It was just a joy to watch. And there was a little scene at the end where they had to work together to save Wreck-It Ralph. That was almost like a Disney princess version of the Avengers. Like I was watching, Iron Man and Captain America and Thor working together for the first time, like in the Avengers, first Avengers movie. So that ironically was like the highlight of the entire movie, was the Disney princesses and kind of just how they bounced off each other, because previously you've never seen them obviously together. You've seen them in separate, their separate movies, and the parks and the merchandising kind of have them, in little stories, but they've never ever shared actually, one space. With the obvious exception, of course, of like, Anna and Elsa, because they're both from Frozen. So to see all of them come together, and it's again like a little minor miracle, kind of like how Infinity War managed to juggle so many different personalities and so many different heroes without it turning into a big mess. The fact that they were able to take, like, I think 13 by my count, if you want to count on Elsa, I think it's about 13 different princesses, and they each kind of had their little moment to shine. They each had a little bit of a one-liner. That's a lot of characters to fit into such a short period of time, and it didn't feel artificial or hurried. I love that. It was amazing, and kind of at the end, with all working together to save Ralph, it was both hilarious and just a joy to see. And Disney is out of their mind if they don't already have like a Disney princess movie. I mean, that movie should be greenlit. It should be in the storyboard phase. I mean, it should already be, they should already be making it. Because if you release that, that's $1 billion guaranteed. Because number one, I mean, people are just going to see it just because they're Disney princesses. But if they continue, I think that, that element of what they started here with the dialogue and characterization, and they can find a story that can still incorporate all of that, I think it would be amazing. I mean, it would definitely be a movie I'll be watching day one, with my daughters. So that's pretty much it. And that was kind of the worry, before we watched it, because when we look at the trailers, it's like, is Wreck-It Ralph 2 essentially just going to be a sort of commercial for the, the Disney princess franchise? One of those things that kind of where, what was it, like Batman didn't show up in Batman 1, but in issue so-and-so of Detective Comics. Like, that's why that issue is famous, because, that's when Batman makes their first appearance, or when Wolverine makes his first appearance in the Incredible Hulk number so-and-so. Like, could this movie, Wreck-It Ralph 2, be looked upon historically as being only important because it introduced the concept of the Magnificent 13 or something, of the great Disney princess line, and now they could have a $1 billion franchise moving forward. So I don't know, but yeah, that was basically what saved the film, in my opinion, was the Disney princesses. But as a standalone story by itself, with Ralph and Vanellope and all of that, my opinion was it was pretty mediocre, pretty average, and definitely I liked the first one a lot better, because again, the characters, they just acted a lot better. You like them a lot better. So anyways, that's my first movie review. Depending on how I feel about other movies, I might do a couple of these. So maybe many years down the road, we can look back on that and laugh about my thoughts on these various blockbusters and stuff like that I see. And then my daughter can take a look at that also and see what my thoughts were at that time. So for those of you, who are on the fence about watching it, maybe this will give you a little bit more clarity, just my opinion on that. Okay, so I'm gonna do a couple more reviews on my collection now, ironically. The next one I think I'm gonna do is one on the Saks Fifth Avenue 17-inch limited edition Cinderella doll, which is a sight to see. So until then, everyone take care.